April 30th, 1945. As the Red Army closed in on the Führer bunker in Berlin, Adolf Hitler committed suicide alongside his wife Eva Braun. Other top Nazi leaders, like Joseph Goebbels, would follow suit, bringing about the swift collapse of the Third Reich. The Second World War in Europe had ended, at long last. Soon, those who were part of Hitler's regime and those who collaborated with it would face justice at Nuremberg. But not all. While it is well known that many of these individuals would escape to places like Spain and Latin America after the war, what is lesser known are those who came to the United States as part of Operation Paperclip, which saw Nazi scientists secretly transferred to their new comfortable homes in places like Texas, New Mexico, and Alabama to work on American weapons and space programs. These scientists will live amongst regular Americans for the rest of their lives, with their past scrubbed clean and swept under the rug. Many of them would also die being hailed as all-American heroes. One such individual was the mysterious Wernher von Braun, who led the development of the Saturn V rockets that put Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. In this episode, we'll take a deep dive into how von Braun, the leading mind of Nazi Germany's rocket programs, and a member of the Nazi Party as well as the SS, was brought to the United States, where he will leave behind a complex and divisive legacy. Werner Magnus Maximilian Freyer von Braun was born on March 23, 1912, in Wierzitz, province of Posen, then part of the Kingdom of Prussia and the larger German Empire. As a young Prussian aristocrat, von Braun was raised in a highly conservative and militaristic household that was loyal to the Kaiser above all else. After his early education at various elite boarding schools, where he developed a lifelong interest in rocketry and space exploration, von Braun entered the Technische Universität Berlin in 1930 for his undergraduate studies in mechanical engineering. While there, he joined the school's amateur rocketry association, the Verein für Raumschifffahrt, or VFR for short, where he worked on experimental rockets with Germany's top rocket scientists. Von Braun's passion for space travel is perhaps best summed up in the following quote from himself, recounting his reaction after reading an article on an imaginary trip to the moon. "It filled me with a romantic urge," he said. "Interplanetary travel. Here was a task worth dedicating one's life to. Not just stare through a telescope at the moon and the planets, but to soar through the heavens and actually explore the mysterious universe. I knew how Columbus had felt." Unfortunately, it would be many years in a world war before von Braun could dedicate himself to space exploration. Just 2 years later, in 1932, he and his fellow VFR members were approached by the German army, then still the Reichswehr of the interwar Weimar Republic, to help develop a weaponized rocket program. While most other members of the VFR were unwilling to work with the military, von Braun signed up, believing that if working for the military was the way to get funding for his spaceflight research, then that was what he would do, even if he himself had no interest in using rockets for war. The German military would also fund his doctoral pursuit in physics, which he would finish in 1934, earning him a PhD at just 22. With that, von Braun became the civilian head of the Reichswehr's rocket development program, located at the Kummersdorf military complex, around 25 kilometers south of Berlin. He reported to Captain Walter Dornberger, later a major general in the Wehrmacht, who would remain von Braun's superior till war's end. Although it is widely believed that von Braun was apolitical, as was usually the case for German aristocrats who despised partisan politics and respected only the old imperial system, politics would soon become intertwined with von Braun's life, whether he liked it or not. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power after being appointed chancellor by the ailing president Paul von Hindenburg. As the Nazis took over each German institution one after the other, von Braun, like many others, soon found himself working under the swastika banner. Although his sentiment towards Nazism was reported to range from indifference to disdain, he continued working for the military, holding on to his arguably stubborn and questionable conviction that funding is funding regardless of where it was coming from. As technical director, von Braun's work at the Kummersdorf military complex saw the successful development of the first 3 iterations of the aggregate missiles. the A-1 rockets in 1933, which are considered the grandfather of most modern rockets, the A-2 rockets in 1934, and the A-3 in 1935. In May of 1937, von Braun, his superior Dornberger, as well as their 90-man team, were transferred from Kummersdorf to the Peenemünde Army Research Center, located on the island of Usedom in northeastern Germany. There, he was also joined by his brother, Magnus von Braun, who worked at the research center as a chemist. Around this time, von Braun, who had long avoided joining the Nazi Party, finally decided to become an official party member, supposedly under pressure, according to himself. The precise time of this event is unclear, but records show that he either joined on December 1, 1938 or May 15, 1937. Then, in 1940, at the insistence of Heinrich Himmler, von Braun also joined the SS, accepting the commission of a second lieutenant. From that point forward, he received a yearly promotion, and by war's end, Wernher von Braun would reach the formidable rank of an SS major. In 1942, von Braun would finalize the design of the most advanced and terrifying weaponry at the time, the A-4 rocket. And a year later, in 1943, it was rushed into mass production at the Mittelwerk underground factory. There, prisoners from the Mittelbau Dora and Buchenwald concentration camps slaved away day after day in terrible conditions to produce the A-4 ballistic missiles, as well as other weaponry for their captors. It is estimated that some 12,000 to 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died there in those cold, disease-ridden tunnels. Starting in 1944, the A-4 rocket would be used against cities in Western Europe like London and Antwerp to devastating effect, causing massive civilian casualties. Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels proudly proclaimed this powerful new rocket as Germany's second wonder weapon after the V-1 flying bomb, and thereby renamed the A-4 to the V-2, meaning Vengeance Weapon 2. The Nazis' wishful thinking and fixation on wonder weapons, however, would not turn the tide of war in their favor. By January of 1945, it was clear the end was coming. With the Russians closing in, von Braun and his team were ordered by the SS to move south, eventually reaching Oberammergau in the northern foothills of the Bavarian Alps. There, they would learn of Hitler's suicide through the radio, and soon it became clear that they were in a race against time to surrender to the Americans before the Soviets found them first. Fortunately for von Braun and his followers, the Americans were just as eager to find them. On May 2, 1945, Magnus von Braun, Wernher's brother, who spoke much better English, approached the American troops camped at the nearby town of Schottwald. Von Braun and the others were then interviewed by the Counterintelligence Corps of the U.S. Army, which recognized that they had stumbled upon Nazi Germany's top minds. Efforts were quickly organized to extract as much information as possible from these German scientists and transfer them to work in the United States. This was the beginning of Operation Paperclip. Holger Toftoy, then a major in the U.S. Army, became instrumental to this operation. He will later recall, "After my field intelligence team started to interrogate the German scientists, I soon felt the information on missiles was so great and so important that it should not be handled by routine field reports." Thus, working closely with Wernher von Braun, the pair drew up a list of German scientists they wanted to move to the United States. While originally consisting of some 300 men, the list was eventually cut down to just over 100. This early encounter between the two men was recounted in the following television program celebrating Toftoy's military career.
General Toftoy is the one man responsible for my being here tonight.
The voice of a man whose life was virtually in your hands, General Toftoy, and who has given to the United States the results of his brilliance. From Huntsville, Alabama, where he is technical director of the Army Ballistics Missile Agency at the Redstone Arsenal, Dr. Wernher von Braun. Would you tell us, Dr. von Braun, about your first meeting with General Toftoy?
Well, I first met you, General Toftoy, immediately after the shooting in World War II had ended. My fellow scientists and I had just made a rather desperate effort to escape the Russian armies which were closing in on us from the east. Thus, Mr. Edwards, when our families and us finally reached the American lines, our families, the women, particularly the children, were in utter misery. I was immediately impressed by your great humanity, General Toftoy, and after all the terrible things we had just been through, meeting such a man as you was a heartwarming experience indeed. You did not act at all like a military man in those days. Your first concern, I remember that very vividly, was for milk for our babies. You really took us under your wing. I remember how you left for the United States shortly thereafter to convince the Army that it was important that some of us be brought to America to work on rocket development, and how on your return to Germany, with this approval, you and I sat together and chose the, I think, 127 of us who were to come to the United States.
We wanted 300, remember?
I remember very well.
General Toftoy was then put in charge.
Wernher von Braun and a selected few arrived in Boston in mid-September 1945. In the subsequent months, another 118 German scientists would arrive in 3 separate shiploads. These men would then begin their career in a new country for a new government, first working at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, then at Fort Bliss in El Paso, New Mexico, and finally at the newly established Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. While there were some criticisms toward their presence, over time, von Braun and his fellow German scientists, with their past largely obscured and redacted, became accepted by American society. Even though he was once again working on weaponized rockets such as the Redstone, Jupiter, and Pershing missiles, in America, von Braun finally had the opportunity to pursue his true passion, the cosmos. He began to write articles and give public talks on the prospects of space exploration. Step by step, he reinvented himself as a visionary scientist. The past faded into the background as he became the public face of post-war American optimism and technological ambition. This is perhaps most clearly showcased in this footage of von Braun appearing on a Disney educational film, discussing his plan to put mankind in space.
Now here's a model of my design for a 4-stage orbital rocket ship. Compared to the unmanned instrument rocket, it is quite large, but the overall size and weight of the rocket is mainly determined by the 11 tons weight of this top section. This weight dictates the amount of fuel and the numbers of motors needed to produce enough power to equalize the gravitational pull of the Earth. The payload in the top section will consist of 10 crew members plus equipment. Notice the wings, small rocket motor, and landing gears. This is a section that must ultimately return the men to the Earth safely. To produce the energy needed to hurl this stage into the orbit, we need these 3 additional rocket-powered sections.
Von Braun's early advocacy for a dedicated space program was largely ignored or not taken seriously. However, all this would change in 1957 with the Soviets' successful launch of the first ever satellite, Sputnik 1, and the subsequent start of one of the Cold War's most exciting chapters, the space race. In 1960, President Eisenhower transferred von Braun's rocket development group at Redstone Arsenal from the Army to the newly established NASA, which stands for National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA's primary objective was to develop the Saturn rockets that were to be used for space exploration. Accordingly, von Braun became director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and the chief architect of the Saturn V launch vehicle, the super booster that propelled Americans to the moon in 1969 during the Apollo 11 mission. For this incredible feat, Wernher von Braun was hailed as an American hero who put the country miles ahead in the space race. Indeed, without von Braun's expertise, American space and missile programs would not have progressed at such an impressive speed. He became known throughout virtually every family across the United States, and millions of children with dreams of one day becoming an astronaut or a rocket scientist looked up to him. In 1970, von Braun moved to Washington, D.C. at the request of NASA to head up the strategic planning effort for the agency. Then, in 1972, after more than a decade at NASA, he decided to leave to work for Fairchild Industries of Germantown, Maryland. He died in Alexandria, Virginia, on June 16, 1977, survived by his wife and 3 children, and never once faced legal judgment for his wartime activities. His past, working for the Nazis and as a member of the Nazi Party and the SS, would only become widely known years after his death. So what should one make of Wernher von Braun's complicated life and legacy? Was he a war criminal who never faced justice, an opportunist who compromised on ethics to fund his work, or simply a man with a passion who was caught up in a fanatical system, unable to resist? Could all 3 of these characterizations be true? In terms of his decision to join the Nazi Party and the SS, in von Braun's later years, he would explain that under the circumstances, he did not have a choice in the matter. Rejection would have been taken as a show of disloyalty and a personal insult to the all-powerful Himmler, which could mean death. The close colleagues of von Braun also reported that he was in many aspects an extremely unenthusiastic party member. It is said that he rarely wore his swastika lapel pin, a symbol of party membership, and only wore his SS uniform when it is required. His secretary Dorette Kirsten Schlitt also reported that von Braun sometimes neglected to pay his monthly party membership fees of 2 Reichsmark. Willy Ley, a science writer and fellow VFR member who knew von Braun from their student days, made the following comment about his thoughts on the latter's attitude towards Nazism. "Did we discuss politics? Hardly. Our minds were always far out in space. But I remember a few chance remarks, which might be condensed into saying that the German Republic was no good and the Nazis ridiculous. That, of course, was simply the political platform of the Society of German Nobility, to which von Braun's father and possibly also Wernher von Braun belonged. Regardless of the degree to which he was committed to the Nazi ideology, however, von Braun's creation, the V-2 missile, was still responsible for the deaths of thousands. Wernher von Braun had mixed feelings about the weaponization of the V-2 and expressed, years after the war, "We wanted our rockets to travel to the Moon and Mars, but not to hit our own planet." Nonetheless, von Braun still celebrated with his colleagues when the rockets began hitting major Allied cities like London, and said that he felt a sense of nationalistic pride. In 1977, von Braun was quoted by The Guardian saying the following about the bombing of London: "I felt satisfaction. I visited London twice between world wars, and I loved the place. But I loved Berlin, and the British were bombing the hell out of it." Perhaps von Braun's sentiment towards the V-2 bombings can be explained away by the simple fact that Germany was at war, and war necessarily entails casualties, both civilian and military. But what about the slave labor that was used to build the V-2 rocket? Did von Braun ever object to the treatment of Jewish people by the Nazi regime? While there is no record of explicitly anti-Semitic acts or statements on the part of von Braun, there is no clear evidence that he was bothered by the oppression of Jewish people either. It is certain that von Braun was aware of the employment of concentration camp prisoners for slave labor, and was implicated in decisions regarding the usage of slave labor to some degree. There is no credible evidence to show that he ever made any meaningful attempt to protest against the usage of slave labor or to improve the nightmarish working conditions. In fact, one of the most damaging evidence against von Braun is his familiarity with the camp commandants of both the Buchenwald and Mittelbau-Dora concentration camps. On occasions, von Braun even visited the camps himself to identify prisoners with the qualifications to work on more complex projects. There are also reports of von Braun physically assaulting concentration camp victims, but these are less credible sources that are difficult to verify. As previously mentioned, none of this information was widely available until long after von Braun's passing. Indeed, the efforts to whitewash his wartime activities on his part and that of the United States government, as well as his associates, both German and American, proved highly effective. In the chaos at the end of the Second World War, record-keeping was hardly a priority. Many aspects of von Braun's life story were pieced together either by his own account or other secondhand and likely biased sources. Even if one chooses to believe that von Braun was not an ideological Nazi, and there is evidence supporting that, it is undeniable that he decided to prioritize rocketry above all else, including human lives. In the end, it is von Braun's lack of empathy toward the victims of Nazism, his willingness to conform to the regime to advance his projects, and his absence of genuine remorse in the post-war years that make his character deeply questionable. This moral ambiguity is compounded by the comfortable deal he received from the US government, as well as the honors and celebration he was given in America. All because his expertise was deemed indispensable for winning the Cold War. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any thoughts on the complicated legacy of Wernher von Braun, do let me know in the comments. Additionally, please like and subscribe for more Cold War related videos. See you next time.